All right, looks like we're live. Excellent. How's it going, everybody? Looks like we got some people hanging out in the chat there. Corbin, Cody Bassett, Zesty Car, good to see you all. Apologies, slightly late. I had a notification. One of my people texted me, and so now I had to totally restructure my entire weekend, and in fact, the next several weeks. Because we're going to get rained out on a camping trip I'm going on this weekend, and which is very unfortunate because he didn't text me until after I went and picked up firewood. So now I have a bunch of firewood that I'm not going to be able to get rid of out of my car. Um, so that's very irritating. But anyway, so yes, here I am. Apologies for being late. So yeah, we are here today to celebrate the 1,500 followers that I have finally accumulated on Twitter. It happened a day or two ago, and it's interesting. Like I never thought that I would actually ever get to 1,500. I never even thought that I was going to get to 1,000. Like it took me forever, like forever, to get me to 500. Um, I like getting to 1,500. There's like a threshold, like barrier. Like it takes you a certain amount of time to get a certain amount of followers, and then once you hit that threshold, then it becomes slightly easier for a bit, and then to get to the next threshold, it seems like it takes even longer to get there. And maybe this is just like a social media like Twitter suppression thing, where freedom of speech doesn't equal freedom of reach thing. But I just find it takes a really really long time to get to like where you want to go in terms of followers. You have to be constantly posting all the time, and maybe I could be accused of that to a fair degree. But it's also kind of a celebratory stream as well, because I'm very close indeed to getting to 500 subscribers on YouTube. Um, I'm at 497 currently, so I'm literally three people away from getting to the big 50. So I mean, I guess this could be like a combined celebratory stream. Who knows? So this is my AMA stream, as I said. So yes, please, this is an interactive stream. Please don't be shy about chat comments. I would love to hear questions. I would like to see commentary. Um, I will answer whatever questions that you send my way. Also, I almost got into an accident today. I think there was a guy who, like, I don't know if it's just this is like a driver's thing or if this is a local regional thing, but there was a dude in like a lifted truck. He's obviously like a redneck, and like I'm trying to merge over to another lane. Like there was a car ahead of me that was going real slow, and like I couldn't get to speed up in time, and this dude who's going like 90 miles an hour on the freeway, and I'm trying to merge over because the exit I'm trying to get off on is to the left, which is of course the fast lane, and so he's trying to get out, and like this dude like followed me for a bit and like gave me the bird. Is kind of weird, but anyway, like I don't like just generally I don't mind dudes who have like lifted trucks or anything, but like I just there's a special type of redneck which is very like antisocial, extremely disagreeable. Um, um, yeah, like I've worked with this type of person before too, and like they always try to cut corners. They're always like trying to get the job done as quick as possible, and they never like are just focused on getting the job done correctly. It's funny because I have like I've worked in around blue collar people quite a bit, and just because of my experience in the military and that sort of thing, and so you see these types of people, and really as a manager or a leader of any type, the question that you have to like avoid is this question of when labor is asking you, well, do you want this done right or do you want this done quickly? And management's answer is always yes to that question, which is very unfortunate. And just generally speaking, this type of like redneck always seems to be on the oh, I want this done quickly answer to that question. And like it's a huge problem because like they just cut corners and do things unsafely and like the job is never done correctly. There's always something wrong with it. And you're like, dude, why didn't you do this right? Like, yeah, you got it done on time or well ahead of time, but you didn't do it right. Like it was like, and now you have to go back and fix it, which takes even more time. And if you just done it correctly the first time, it would have been done. Anyway, well, it looks like we have quite a bit of people. Welcome, Charlemagne. Good to see some friends in here. First question: why is the stream late? Well, I've already answered that. What is the next one? There we go. Do I like Getter Robo Armageddon? No, I don't know what that is. Martin Calendar, anime PFP. What exactly is Getter Robo Armageddon? What is that? Is that an anime show that is like good and based and wholesome? I guess like there's a lot of anime out there that's not so wholesome. There, guys. I'm gonna break it to you gently there. It's so over. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. What exactly is this anime here that of which you speak? Can you explain it to me, or can you post me a Wikipedia link if it is an anime? Ask him about the Third Reich versus Great Britain, says Charlemagne. Okay, now this is a take, right? So all right. So Martin Calendar says, "No, it's like an anti-nuclear mecha." Okay, not. Oh, you said why are you telling me about it if it's not good? There, Martin Calendar. Why? Why would you bring this garbage to my stream? Like I only want to hear about good shows and good like based stuff that I can watch. Like I'm actually like a lot of people now. We are in like a television and movies desert. There is absolutely nothing to watch on TV. Like I'm digging so deep into the archives here. I'm going back to old BBC shows from like the 70s. There's one actually which I've finally found, and it's on a black dude's channel. Apparently, has a picture of a black guy, and as the profile pic. But of course, it's like the full BBC series from 1972, starring Anthony Hopkins of all people. So it's a wonderful like, and of course it's for Tolstoy's War and Peace. So it's the 1970s version. It's very good. I haven't seen. Oh, of course. He says the first three. See, this is confusing because that looks like a she, but you have a dude name as your profile. So like, why? It's like, why? Why would you do this, Martin? So you're like, that's the way that they get you. They bring you in for the first three episodes that are good, and then the rest of it is just trash. That's just low effort. I'm sorry. Like you have to start with good concepts to begin with, and then you can like a show can be a slow burn, but it has to get consistently better as it goes on, right? I mean, I've never seen this particular show, that particular anime, but I've heard that Neon Genesis Evangelion is one of those. That wasn't really my forte or my wheelhouse back in the day when like I was in fourth grade and watching anime on Toonami, but yes. So actually, I think we can go to this question, this extremely lengthy question about the Third Reich versus Great Britain. Okay, so I've been discussing this question with Charlemagne for a very very long time, probably about a couple months now, and I have a take that is based, at least I feel, in pretty soundly in military and geostrategic and geopolitical, foreign relations theory, and but my take is how could the Third Reich have won the Second World War? And my take, in essence, is that the Third Reich made the mistake of invading the Soviet Union just a little bit too early. I readily admit the possibility that in war with the Soviet Union was inevitable. Hitler knew it was inevitable. He said it was inevitable in Mein Kampf. The entire National Socialist movement was like very anti-Bolshevik from the very beginning, and it's very clear that this alliance was, or I shouldn't say alliance, that the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was, shall we say, a little bit uh, temporary in nature. And so my theory is, on terms of how does the Third Reich how does the Third Reich win the Second World War, ultimately comes down to the question of how does the Third Reich defeat Britain in 1940 and 1941, and possibly early 1942 at latest. My answer to this is the North African campaign. I think the Germans got involved in North Africa also a little bit too late. You have to remember that the Germans have to conquer all of the Baltic regions, and that includes Greece. That includes Crete, right? They're the famous Crete in a airborne invasion of Crete. That was basically, I mean, the Germans took heavy casualties in the assault on Crete amongst their actual Fallschirmjäger forces, but I think it's very interesting to note that like that whole area, and if you think about the Mediterranean, right, specifically how easily closed off it is, right? The British, in order to access the empire, need access to go through the Suez Canal, right? We've seen this even today with all of the shenanigans that are going on there right now with the Houthi rebels in Yemen, closing off access to international shipping. So if you can basically take Egypt, and you've already gotten the French territories, the French colonial territories, right? Because France, at least Vichy France, is also already by this point, after the fall of France, it's basically a belligerent party in favor of Nazi Germany. That's why the British attack on Mers el Kabir happened, right? The famous British attack where you have Churchill ordering the Royal Navy to actually shell the French fleet that is held up in port in Mers el Kabir. So that is like, this is one of the reasons, and like, just think of it, right? Italy also was always perceived of by the Germans as negative or net negative in their like war effort, basically, right? They're just trash. They're useless. Okay, well, how do you get them to not be useless? Okay, well, the answer is they're already involved in Italy. They're kind of getting their asses handed to them by the British in North Africa before the Germans get there. And the Italian Navy already has a surface fleet in the Mediterranean. So where, like, the you need to be able to concentrate forces and have a supremacy of total forces, and especially supremacy in the decisive arm of warfare in whatever period you're in. And of course, in the decisive arm of warfare in the Second World War, as has been noted constantly throughout all levels of historical analysis from every single sector politically, it's undeniable. That decisive arm of warfare was air power. That decisive arm of warfare was armored maneuver warfare. So, and having those two things work in tandem is how the Germans won so many victories early on. Now, that being said, there is a case to be made, which is, what if the Germans never fought the Battle of Britain? And this is essentially my case of how the Third Reich could win the Second World War. The the Germans lost a lot of aircraft in the Battle of Britain. It was not a favorable attrition ratio. If I remember correctly, it was something like 24 or 2,500 German aircraft that were lost as compared to 1,900 British aircraft. So, and of course, it's a propaganda victory as well for the British. The British need a victory after Dunkirk, right? They've lost in the Low Countries and in Denmark and in Norway, right? Even though the German Navy took substantial losses in the Norway and Scandinavian campaign. So you have so basically what the British need the Battle of Britain in order to get it back, right? This is a military phrase called "getting it back" that they use, right? Which is kind of signifies the moral initiative, right? Or like you failed at a task and now you come back and you complete this and you've gotten it back, right? So the British kind of need to get it back in after the fall of France and after Dunkirk. So the Germans, in attacking Britain at home, where the British are strongest, allowed the British a relatively easy, although at the time not really not really predictable victory. Obviously, the role of technology here, because Britain has a lot of radar and that sort of thing, so they can basically see all of the German squadrons coming. And that is a huge boon to interior lines of supply. Right? If you can just think about like time, speed, distance, and sending out a fighter squadron to intercept another squadron, right? That takes you have to be able to understand, okay, it takes this much time for my squadron to intercept the enemy if we intercept them when they are on a specific course. And in order to be able to do that, you have to have very specific information. And this is getting a lot technical, so I'll probably should just keep it to the strategic side of things. Basically, the entire point strategically is that the British were in need of some kind of strategic victory in 1940-41, and the Germans obliged them with the Battle of Britain, and that allowed the British basically to stay in the war. It allowed Churchill to stay in the war. It allowed the British to get sympathy in America, allowed them to use the propaganda battle to get lots of sympathy. It also kind of allowed Roosevelt to get involved as well, because the Germans were trying to blockade the fleet or to blockade the British island. So like the whole North Atlantic is kind of the decisive time of the war, that whole post fall of France, because the United States now feels obligated to help, and they're doing everything they can to help. So you're not going to starve Britain out that way. No, you have to defeat them politically at home. My argument is also derived from the fact that democracies, you don't really defeat them in warfare. You have to exhaust them, right? The way that you get somebody who doesn't want to make peace with you to make peace with you is you have to inflict consistent losses, consistent defeats. So like my rule is you get like 3 strikes and you're out, basically. So you've already lost fall of France and Denmark, Norway. You've already lost it with Poland, right? You've already lost with Dunkirk, and really this is how, when you have to remember that Churchill's a Tory boy, right? The thing that's most precious to him is the British Empire. And so if you're saying, if you're Herr Hitler, you need to say in as like militarily as possible, to basically say, look, okay, you can't you're going to lose the empire if you keep fighting this war. Like, you've been defeated several times over and over and over again, and you don't have the manpower, you don't have your armor, you don't have the air power, you don't have the ability to defend the entire world from the Japanese in the Pacific as well as the Germans in Europe. and the Italians in Europe. You're just stretched too far and you're isolated too much. So it's always about relative strength. You see, you also have to remember that the British had lost in France, so like pretty much their entire armor corps, like all of their heavy equipment. They lost, and they had to reconstitute it. Right, that took a lot of time to do that. To be able to fight the North African campaign as like an armored, like very clearly an armored and air power style of warfare, which uses maneuver warfare. Like it's the perfect environment for tanks, basically, considering like how little like intervening terrain there is. So North Africa is perfect, absolutely perfect for this purpose. Well, the British, if they were to try to like do stuff in North Africa, that might work against the Italians, who are just completely feckless. But against the might of the German panzer forces, well, probably a different story without the help of the United States. So that's one thing. The other thing, obviously, also is the Soviet Union. The great argument is, how do the Germans deal with the Soviet Union? Well, the relations had already been breaking down for like 6 months prior to Barbarossa. And that was ultimately coming on the question of Romania. Like this is the weakest form of my take here, and because ultimately, if the Russians had decided, oh, I'm going to invade Romania and take the rest of Romania, then the Germans have no more oil and gas, basically. So they'd be screwed. They'd be SOL, unless they were getting oil from like directly from the Middle East because they controlled Egypt, which maybe that could have worked. But really, the entire ideological apparatus as it stood in 1940 and 41 was that the Germans and the Soviet Union were probably going to go to war at some point. They had made peace. However, Stalin, even though he was building up and preparing to go to war, he was not ready to go into the conflict either, and nor do I think that he would have been necessarily ready by 1943. Yeah, okay, you would have had several thousand more T-72s. I'll get into that in a second. But the main point is, Stalin was expecting the war between Britain and Germany and France to last a lot longer. He was expecting them to exhaust themselves relatively rapidly, and to that would be the moment that Stalin would strike, basically, is, oh, after all of these other countries have exhausted their military might, then I will just march in for a basically unopposed victory. That was Stalin's game plan, pre-war. And the interesting thing about this is that North Africa, even if the British are losing, if Stalin sees that the Germans are committing a lot more of their firepower to the North African campaign, maybe he would have thought, okay, well, that just gives me more time to prepare. The Germans are attriting their armored forces. They're taking losses, irreplaceable losses, even just because of the fact that they're fighting. And maybe that would have, relations would have cooled down because there's less pressure, right? The Germans are not focused on the Russians so much. And so the Russians are like, okay, well, we can just do our thing for now, basically. And we can prepare and be ready for the inevitable conflict when it happens. Now, I will get into, now that I've addressed the strategic element, I want to get into the operational and technological element as well. First, the British fleet, you need to draw them into the Mediterranean, where you can actually use the Italian Navy. To force the British home fleet away from the British Isles is very important, because it allows you, first of all, to attack the home fleet when it is out of range of its defenses. Second, it allows you, if you're the Germans, to station submarines, surface bases, if possible, unlikely, and it also allows you to use the decisive arm of warfare at the period, which is air power in the Mediterranean. And it forces the British to commit to the Mediterranean when they are outgunned, maneuvered on the ground, thanks to panzer forces, and basically are going to be outfought because you have air power against surface vessel power. So, and also just think of how the war would have played out by that point if the British had not been able to perform their surprise raid on Toronto. Toronto is one of the fascinating things because it tells you that early on that air power is superior to sea power. This had already been theoretically proven by people like Curtis LeMay in the 1920s, but really Toronto and the sinking of HMS Wales and Repulse in 40-41, as well as Pearl Harbor in late 41, essentially prove that air power is the way to go against surface vessels. So to be able to have the Luftwaffe fighting over the Mediterranean on much more favorable terms operationally, because the British won't have their strategic radar emplacements like they do in Britain, in the home islands, that's far, far better for the Germans than anything else, like at least in terms of like dealing a more favorable rate of attrition. And it also, the ability to inflict losses on the British home fleet is incredible. That is, from the British point of view, extremely demoralizing, right? Hitler seems to make this very crucial mistake, and the Germans do in general, that the strength of the British is not in their army. It's not in their air force. It's in their navy. That is what they think is their traditional strength. So as long as the British Navy is undamaged, the British are never ever going to make peace terms with you, because they'll just, be their little fortress island sneering at people on the continent. And you can tell this from this pattern, right, of behavior that the British have against Napoleon, and they did it the same as Hitler, the same to Hitler, I should say. So it's not really something that was like unforeseeable from the perspective of the Führer. Now, so that's the first aspect, is the usage of air power in the Mediterranean. And that's basically what I would have done if I were in the position of playing as the Third Reich player, as it were, in order to defeat the British in North Africa. The other thing is technology. Everybody loves to point out the Russians have this absolutely insane amount of production for aircraft and tanks. However, if for those of our friends who are Stalin's war-pilled, who are McMeekin-pilled, you understand that level of production was not tenable pre-war for the Soviets. If you look on some of the figures, right, and I just was curiously looking at some of the Wikipedia figures for 1941 T-34 production, the decision to switch over to T-34 had basically already been made, if I'm not mistaken. And essentially, the Russians had a lot of light tanks. And this is like for 1939, 1940, early 41, okay, this is kind of acceptable. Once Barbarossa kicks off, it's very clear that light tanks are no good. And anything with like shitty like armor or not sloped armor, or anything basically below 37 millimeter, anything below 50 millimeter in terms of cannon, it is no good. So the interesting thing about technology for the Germans is all of their forces, if like say all of the Somiwa S-35s, all of the Czech T-35 and T-38Ts, all of the Panzer 1s and 2s and early 3s and 4s, you could have expended a substantial proportion of those against the British in North Africa, and it would have been really no great loss to the Germans. And the reason why I say this is because, like, the Russians had quantity. However, all of their armored vehicles, or most of them, were extremely light tanks. I think the T-60 and T-70 series tanks, which are completely ignored today in any sort of discussion on weapons technology or armor in the context of the Second World War, they're like 47 millimeter guns, right? They're 50 millimeter guns, the same as everybody else, the same as the German, basically Panzer III, right? Same armament, essentially, or close to it. And they built several thousands of these things. So my point is, once the war progresses, the Germans eventually go to the Panzer III with the long-barreled 50 millimeter gun on the Panzer III. You up armor and upgrade the Panzer IVs to the long-barreled 75 millimeter anti-tank gun. You have the proliferation of the Panzer IV with the long, or as I said, the long barrel 75 millimeter. All of those things start proliferating. Furthermore, the proliferation of anti-tank weapons, in terms of what is the name for that specific system? Yes, you have the better versions of the Tellermine. You have better versions of the like the Panzer Schreck and Panzer Faust. Like those weapons for infantry didn't come in until like 1942, late 42, early 43. And I think the production for a lot of the captured anti-tank vehicles that the Germans converted, basically, they used, some of them used the 76 millimeter Soviet anti-tank gun, but a lot of the Germans, basically, they were just using normal 75 millimeter guns that ran the same ammunition, basically. So all of those weapons are extremely effective, and the Germans use them to great effect, right? The Stug 3, I don't think actually went into production with a long barrel until 1943 as well. Late 1942, certainly. This name is killing me. Panzerjäger, that's what I'm talking about. Yes, the Panzerjäger. So the Germans, at the outset of Barbarossa, had the Panzerjäger 1, which, if I remember correctly, had a Czech gun, one of the captured Czech weapons, anti-tank weapons, which is about 4.7 centimeters or 47 millimeters. So it's comparable to like 50 millimeter guns of the time of late 41, early 42. It was not long range enough, basically, for Barbarossa and for Russia, so it didn't do so well after Barbarossa began. But essentially, the Panzerjäger 2s and 3s and 4s really didn't come in till much, much later, right? Right, so the Nashorn is something else as well. The Nashorn didn't even come in until like late 42, after the Germans figured out that, oh, hey, the 88 millimeter is actually like OP against tanks. So like all of that stuff didn't come in until early 1943. So my theory is the Germans really needed to have kept the Soviets placated for another year at least, until the British were willing to make peace by defeating them in North Africa. By that point, regardless of whatever Soviet production levels were, you've effectively not given America an excuse to get into the war by taking away the sympathy that they have for the British, since the British are out of the way. It's just over. The war with the British is over. There's no more sympathy to be had there because, you've made peace with them. And so now you can deal with the Soviet Union on its own terms and by itself. And if you look at the production numbers for the T-34 in 1941, the numbers that I've seen floating around Wikipedia are about 3,000. Which, I mean, okay, if you're starting the conflict, and that was in wartime production, you have to remember, that's 6 months of Barbarossa. And the Soviets had already come up to full production or close to full production, wartime preparation, as it were, or pre-war preparation, as it were, in the first 6 months of 1941. So I don't think that the numbers of T-34s would have, at least for the overwhelming majority of the conflict, have exceeded 3,000 per year. The problem that the Soviets have, of course, is all of their tanks, the tens of thousands that they have, are all light tanks. And you have the T-40, which is has a 20 millimeter gun. It's, in 1941, it's trash, right? It's not good. This is thing that is supposed to be fighting a Panzer II, basically, but it's just dog shit against anything that's a Panzer III or above, even early Panzer IIIs. But of course, the Russians built lots of them. And the reason why they built lots of them, as McMeekin points out, is they got a shit ton of raw materials from the United States. So I think there's a very good case to be made that Soviet armor production was absolutely able to be attrited and defeated in the field by the German army, even as late as 1943. I think there's an excellent case for that. And of course, the reason why I say that is the technical advantage that the Germans have with Panzerjäger, Marder 1, 2, and 3, all of these other, like the Hornies, the Nashorn, or the Elephant, also the Hetzer, which I think didn't come out until 1943, 44, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, 44. So anyway, all of these older platforms, and the Germans were excellent at doing this in converting French half tracks and things like this into gun platforms, basically. And so these were excellent interim solutions. And so if the Germans had just the proliferation of anti-tank weaponry, and I think actually, if I'm not, the Marder weapons inevitably ended up with the German infantry divisions rather than the armor divisions. So you're basically saying, look, my infantry divisions have excellent anti-tank weapons that are mobile on that even though if they're not armored, they're still useful defensively. My infantry have handheld, shoulder-fired anti-tank weapons. You have Teller mines that can be used. You have all of the anti-tank weapons that the Germans were noted for in the Second World War. You have 88s. You have the increased production of 88 guns as well. So that's the thing. And so, of course, you have all of these other weapons that are just being mass-produced and constructed and en masse, right? And so by the time the Germans are going to invade the Soviet Union under my plan in mid-1943, they're going to have all of the materials they need to conduct Barbarossa. They're going to be well prepared with enough weapons in enough quantity to deal with KV-1, KV-2 tanks and the masses of T-34s. So, in essence, that is my plan for how Germany wins the Second World War. Wow, that took 30 minutes. All right, let's see. What other questions do we have here? Let's see. Charlemagne says, my favorite mecha anime is Code Geass. I have never watched it myself, but I've heard good things. Corbin says, could the Gay be feigning military-industrial weakness to bait China and or Russia into making attacks? No, Corbin, this is not the case. No. And the reason why I say this is because there is no... It's just a cope answer, right? This is that would be a gay cope. I'm intentionally being weak materially so that my enemies deliberately attack me when I'm weak. Like, no. Like, it's one thing to feign weakness on the battlefield or to act like one is not in a strong position, um, to force an enemy to attack you. I think Napoleon did this at Austerlitz, if I'm not mistaken. Um, Famously, his famous victory. And but this doesn't make sense on the industrial and strategic level, because you need to have all of the industry in place in order to be able to prosecute war. NATO powers, the United States included, are learning this almost too late. They have tried to increase production of artillery shells so that they can send them to Ukraine. I have done my own deep dives into this, and the problem that they have for this is you have a factory, which they brought up basically 100% production, right? They brought it from 14,000 shells a month of 155 caliber or 155 millimeter, to 28,000 shells per month. The problem with this, and they've started two other factories, right? So if you look on how many shells that is per month, that is 28,000 times by 3. That's 84,000 shells a month times by 12. That's 1,008,000 shells in a year. Also, these factories are not supposed to come online until 2025, maybe even early 2026. This is kind of what I feel that the gays' plan for Russia is now they want to keep this war going for as long as possible, because they're thinking, aha, Russia's suffering combat losses. Aha, they're running down their ammunition supply. They won't be able to sustain their rate of fire for artillery weapons, the way that they have been in 2026. Basically, the gays making an estimation of when the Russians are running out, and they think that 2026 is when the Russians are going to run out of artillery shells. And so, well, the gay doesn't think this is exactly a problem, because by 2026 we will have NATO-wide the ability to match on a month-by-month basis if we just simply give Ukraine whatever we produce every single month, right? We basically keep no excess for ourselves to keep our stockpiles high. We just give them everything that we produce, basically. Or like it doesn't work like that in real life. You give the oldest munitions out first, right? Because those are, munitions do have an expiration date, of course. But the this just seems to be the gays' plan, right? It is okay. Well, and I've done this calculation too, like just based off of what they've said and some of the numbers that I see floating around for other nations as well. But those aren't going to come up until like 2026, basically. So yeah, and the problem is it's not just in military or industrial weakness that they're feigning. It's real military industrial weakness. It's not a feint. It's real weakness. We can't get the USS Constellation class of ships into service until 3 years after we wanted to. Well, let's be very honest here. The Chinese have the Jiankai too, and they have them aplenty. They're one of the U.S. Navy's preeminent threats in the South China Sea because they use good missiles and they're cheap, easy to construct, and they're small. The Russians also have the Admiral Gorshkov frigate, which is their modern variant of a frigate, basically, which does the same job. The United States, in its dilly-dallying with LCS, has not been able to keep up with frigate construction for surface-to-surface battles. So, no, when you see industrial weakness across the board, it's not going to work. It's not a feint, right? This is real weakness, is my point. How did I get red pilled? Corbin also says. Okay, so this is an interesting story. I'm going to go grab some water because I've been talking for 45 minutes here and I'm thirsty, so I'll be right back. Give me 2 seconds and I will answer this question because it's a long one. All right. So I have returned. How did I get red pilled initially? As I'm sure a lot of people will tell you, it's a journey. And I think the first inklings of this journey probably came from video games, to be honest. Um, there's a couple of video games that have been very, very influential on my thinking. Like the video games, just in general, are very like a very easy source of early red pills because they have to be realistic, right? There's no utopian vision in video games that you can aspire to. It's purely about conquest and domination and military, victories and that sort of thing. Like that's why video games exist, essentially, at least for men. Um, there's one video game which I have played, which is very influential on my thinking, and that was Civilization 6. My brother had it on PS2, I think. This is like 10 or 15 years ago now, but the there's an interesting mistake that you can make in that game. It's not a very good game. I don't really like it because I don't like the combat mechanics. Um, Basically, it's just race up the tech tree, get higher tech, and then squash everybody else. Essentially, once you have higher tech. Um, so I don't particularly like it very much. However, there are interesting lessons to be learned, and that lesson is never, ever, 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 no matter how low on the tech tree it is, never give your enemies your technology. Never give them this technology. And the reason why you should never give them your technology is because if you give India irrigation, this is the famous one that they always ask for is irrigation for some reason. If you give them irrigation, they will rapidly advance up the tech tree and somehow be able to defeat you. And so like their inability to get like tier 1, 2, or tier 3 level tech advancements is a major impediment to the computer from advancing. And the one mistake you can make is that they will pay you. In fact, they will pay you quite large sums of money for simply giving them this one like key piece of technology. So the lesson from that is never allow your technology to willfully be transferred to people who might tomorrow be your enemies. This is a very crucial mistake with the United States makes with China. Um, um, the other red pill video game that I would recommend to everybody is a game called Tropico 3, which one of these days I probably should stream after I finish the Civil War game. Um, I played that Civil War game far too much. So like to a certain degree, it kind of just gets like boring and repetitive after a while. Which is why I've kind of taken a break from it in addition to like studying. But the Tropico 3 is a wonderful game because you can control your little. So basically, for those who don't know, Tropico 3 is like Sim City, but on a tropical island and where you are a tropical dictator. Um, and this basically is like you are an absolute dictator. You can decide who lives and dies. You can assassinate, your political opponents using the Secret Service. You can get the military to just like execute them in cold blood on the streets. It's a fun game for all sorts of hilarious reasons. But the interesting thing about Tropico is you can control your immigration system, and it's very easy to keep your immigration system open. And if you keep it too open for too long, you'll find that you will have an excess population, and then the nationalists get pissed at you, and they don't like it for obvious reasons. And the um, your housing supply goes like way like limited, and so like you just when you have immigration at that level for so long, there's no amount of tenements that you can build that are fast enough to keep up with the rate of population growth. This is a major red pill because if inevitably you don't have enough work for people, people don't have anywhere to live, right? They have to live in little like cardboard shacks and stuff in poverty, living off the dole or just not doing anything whatsoever, living a very horrific life at the lowest end of the economic spectrum. Um, and if you do that, inevitably you end up getting a revolution, a violent one. And if your military isn't good enough because you totally were focused on the economy and building houses and just trying to keep up with your population, you find that you're not going to stay in power because your military is not going to be happy either. Um, so And the reason why the military is not going to be happy is like in order to reduce pressure on the housing market, you have to force your soldiers to live on the military base, right? Which actually does help, but it's a better quality of life than living on life on base is actually better quality and higher trust than a lot of other places. But anyway, so the that was one of the original red pills for me personally playing one of my own games is this game called Tropico 3. Also, I love that game too because you can play as all of these stereotypical Latin American right-wing dictators. Pinochet is absolutely a playable character. Both of the Perons, totally playable characters. You can create whatever character you want. So like you can literally be a certain Austrian dictator from the middle of the 20th century if you so desired. You can create your own character to do this. He might not have the correct mustache, but he will have a mustache. Um, so yeah, that was how I originally got red pilled. It was through video games. Um, Other than that, my personal story of like how did I come to slowly go into like Mauricismus, I guess you would say. That answer is basically because I had interactions with Indian individuals um, in my hometown in California. The neighborhoods are ethnically divided, as we all know from any sort of demography map. But basically, you have the white population above a certain point north, and then everybody south of that is like mixed white, mixed Asian, and then below that it starts to gentrify again, and maybe you get like a bit of like the lefty progressive type with a lot of Hispanics like directly adjacent to them. Like California is not really home to a lot of blacks, except in certain areas like in Los Angeles. Um, so just in me interacting with them in a service industry job, like I'm not ashamed to admit I got a shitty job out of college and had to work bussing tables and that thing to make ends meet, and just dealing with these people in the restaurant and food service context was enlightening, because they're vegetarians, and so they always order the same fucking shit off the menu every single time. Like I knew exactly, like I could just look at them and I knew exactly what they were going to order before it came out of their mouth. And that was so those things all kind of combined and got me red pilled. I mean, in terms of like becoming a conservative, I would say probably the military is also like helpful as well for that. Um, like if my pathway went from like new atheist shitlib in college, um, to like where I am now. Um, so the military as like a conservative, like pull yourself up by your bootstraps, like, hey, let me tell you about how the government controls your life. and sucks. Like, well, there's a reason why military guys typically get out and they become very libertarian because they don't like people telling them what to do after years of having it done to them. Let's see what else. Ajay Paul Singh says, "Have you seen Home from the Hill 1960?" Oh, was that addressed to Charlemagne? No, I have not seen it either. Let me Google this. Home from the Hill. What is this? What is this? Home from the Hill is an American melodrama film starring Robert Mitchum, Eleanor Parker, George Peppard, George Hamilton, Everett Sloane, and Luana Patton. Directed in CinemaScope by Vincente Minnelli. Okay, what's the plot here? Okay, so this womanizer, East Texas town, wounded by a jealous husband. This just sounds very boring. Yeah, okay. I don't know why you're sending me this movie. Anyway, that's a strange movie. I do like Robert Mitchum as an actor, though. It's funny, right? Because I guess this is how you have to work through things, but there's an interesting television series from the 1980s called The Winds of War and War and Remembrance, which feature Robert Mitchum, of all people. He's at the end of his career, but it's a very interesting series because it's basically the author Herman Wouk is like a member of a certain group that the Austrian painter did not like very well. And so this basically the shows were based off of a novel by the same titles that he had written, and they basically turned it into a TV series. So anyway, but it's an interesting one. Like it kind of gets off the rails in War and Remembrance. It's very shit libby, very regime talking points in terms of the Third Reich. But it's like the most memorable thing that I remember from that show is how like the depiction of the German Einsatzgruppen mass murdering the Jews, basically, and this has always stuck out to me because there's a scene in which the Germans are rounding up the Jews, and they have them all in this line on a dirt road, and the Germans have this ditch that they've dug, and it's like they're just machine gunning these people into bodies after like frog marching them past the death pits, and the people, they get machine gunned and they scream and they fall in the pits. And I'm like, this is exactly what the narrative is. Like these people want us to believe that these people like without any form of resistance whatsoever like went to their deaths knowing that they were about to die, and got machine gunned basically en masse, and totally didn't put up any sort of a fuss or a struggle or anything like that. And it's I just find that very odd, right? That's a very odd depiction that this sort of like, oh, the Einsatzgruppen kind of just like almost semi-mechanized fashion, like frog marched all of these Jews into the death pits and like shot them. Like it's very strange. PHN Negative says democracy cannot fight attrition wars. No, I didn't say that democracy can't fight attrition wars. I know that democracy can fight attrition wars. The point about attrition wars is you're not there to achieve strategic victory over a democracy. You are trying to get them to stop fighting you, right? You're trying to. Or there's, I love the series 1864, right? I think I've referenced it previously on my other streams, but there's a wonderful series or called 1864. It's a joint Danish and German television series, and it's basically about Bismarck and the nationalist movements of the mid 19th century. And there's a famous scene from it, like this thing, just to tell you how much YouTube sucks nowadays. You used to be able to get this clip on YouTube. You cannot find it anywhere. It's been like scrubbed from the internet. and of course because it has naughty themes in it that speak to us and not to the regime. But um, the scene where Wrangel is in this tent and he's about to get shit canned by von Moltke the Elder, and von Moltke is about to can his ass for incompetence and for procrastination and all of this, and Wrangel, and he's portrayed as this very he's elderly, of course, as Wrangel was in real life, von Wrangel, and at least during 1864, he fought Napoleon, and so he's basically saying like, I fought Napoleon, right? He looks like he's portrayed as this very boorish character. It's odd. I liked his character though because he's trying to get his young Prussian prince into the military lifestyle, and he's got some good lines in there because um, basically the point is he's in this tent and he's arguing with von Moltke and he says, look, you don't defeat Napoleon, you exhaust him, right? And so I love that quote. It's amazing. He's got other good ones too, like the scene where he's like trying to mentally train this prince. He's like, oh, the prince says, oh well, let's do this or that thing, and then von Wrangel says, oh, like are you in charge? Do you make the decisions? And he says, like, basically questioning him, and he's like, the prince is saying these things, and he's issuing commands without issuing a command, right? Are you in charge? Are you the leader of this army? Right? Are you issuing the orders? And so the prince says, okay, we're doing this. And of course, General von Wrangel says, okay, that is the correct answer. That's very good. And so I've really liked that scene a lot. Martin Callender says, couldn't Germany have just not attacked the Soviets? Surely a defensive war would have been much easier to win. I have made this point before as well. However, the two things that I would say is, obviously from Germany's point of view, it's always easier to fight one power other than another, or other than having multiple at the same time. This was Germany's mistake in the First World War, and it was Germany's mistake in the Second World War. And yes, a defensive war, at least initially, against the Soviet Union may have been easier to win. The one caveat I will grant people who say that the Soviet Union needed to have been attacked in Barbarossa when it was, is the air war. And the air war seems to be a little bit, especially in Barbarossa, like the Soviet Union had the largest air force pre-war of any nation. People forget that as a fact. And so if they have air power, the initial attack of the Soviet Union would have been somewhat difficult to defend against, I think. I think the Germans would have had trouble with that, not being able to attrite Soviet air power on the ground. So I think that's one of the ways that a defensive war against the Soviet Union maybe wouldn't have been so easy. Although it's not impossible. Like the Germans did a wonderful job against the Russians in the First World War, especially at Tannenberg. So Corbin says, who might Trump pick for VP? Who do you think might be a good choice? Oh, this is the question. The question of succession that nobody seems to have an answer for. Because now that DeSantis has revealed himself as the regime toady that he is, he's obviously not going to be a choice, and it's probably better for him to be the governor. And do I want DeSantis being president now that he has signed the anti-free speech codes, the anti-Semitism legislation? Not particularly. Do I want Trump to pick Kristi Noem? Not particularly. The problem is that basically the GOP apparatus in its entirety is, because of its funding mechanisms, essentially compromised. Like it always needs to go to the donorship class, which is not certainly not friendly to us and will never allow us to play politics. So I don't have an answer for this. I don't know who he's going to pick. I don't know. Like, I mean, Vivek. I don't trust Vivek. I mean, Vivek is a Pajit. Like, I don't trust him. Um, like, get me a white guy who could do that job for you. Like, although to be fair, Vivek has done and said some very good things, but of course, I look around and all of a sudden, all of the British nations all have Indian leadership, and so I just go, hold on a minute. I have a very elderly, while still somewhat virile president who is definitely above the age of 75 and could pop off at any moment conceivably. Your vice president pick becomes a lot more important when you're old. Let's just say that. So I don't have a good choice, a good answer for you. There just is no good answer, it appears. Let's see. Aaron Wolf 99 says, your opinion on the Tegethoff class dreadnought. Ooh. The Tegethoff class dreadnought. I am not familiar with this. Let me Google this real quick. See, that's interesting. So, like, I'm not actually familiar with the Austro-Hungarian ships. So this is, let me take a look at this. Okay. Okay. 1910, commissioned 12 to 18. They lost 2, they scrapped 2. Okay. Okay, so 19,000 long tons displacement. Okay, or 20,000 tons displacement. Okay, great. 400, only 498 feet long. Like, it's funny, like looking at all of these old battleships, you realize that, like, the Arleigh Burke class destroyer and the Ticonderoga class cruiser are all like, in terms of feet, they're longer than old school dreadnought style battleships. Like, they're all bigger in terms of length. Like, obviously in terms of beam, they're much smaller, which is why they're less weighty. They don't displace as much. Yeah, okay, let's see. It's 91 feet of beam. Imagine driving a ship that is 91 feet across. 91 feet 6 inches across. That's a hog, man. That's like driving a Humvee down the road. Which is I mean, just imagine also that, like, 100 feet wide ships are routine in the merchant world these days. So, like, you're just the ships that we have in the merchant fleet today are just dwarf any sort of warship. Like, an Arleigh Burke class cruiser looks tiny compared to a modern merchant ship. Tiny. Draft 28 feet 7 inches. Okay, that's pretty standard. 28 feet draft. All right. Let's see. What 20 knots. Okay, that's basically comparable to most warships of the time. Like, most battleships basically standardized on 20 knots after the dreadnoughts came out. 4,200 nautical miles at 10 knots. So, okay, if you're running at, like, split plant or something. All right, like 1,000 people. Just imagine 1,000 people on this ship that's only 500 feet, not even 500 feet long. Gosh, it's tiny. Okay, so, like, just looking at its armament here. Okay, so you have 12-inch guns. I don't like that. That seems a bit undergunned for the dreadnought period. If I remember correctly, the British standardized on 14-inch guns, and the same with the Germans. And then later, I think some people went to 15-inch guns. I think that might have been the U.S. I know that the Americans definitely standardized on 16-inch guns later. Let me just look up USS Nevada real quick. This is also launched in roughly the same periods. This is also about a dreadnought, a period battleship. Yep, yeah. USS Nevada has 14-inch guns. Okay. So that Nevada actually was interesting because it was at Pearl Harbor, and if I remember correctly, it was one of the few, um, one of it was the only battleship at Pearl Harbor to actually get underway, if I'm not mistaken. Um, and they had to make a decision to run it aground at Pearl Harbor. So just imagine if you're like the conning officer or the guy who just qualified OOD, and you have to make the conscious decision of running your ship aground so that you don't block the channel of Pearl Harbor. Yeah, they did have 14-inch guns, Ern Wolf. Thank you. Martin says Mandrill for VP. No. I am not by that kind of guy. I'm not somebody like I'm very down on electoral politics these days. Like it's useful for local control, and that's basically what we should use it for. Like we have a hostile, overreaching regime over us, and that's become very clear now. And so I just don't think democratic politics alone is the answer. Like, yeah, okay, you still have to participate because who you vote for city council matters. Who you vote for school board matters. Like during COVID, who you vote for governor matters, right? Having a governor who is not going to implement COOF restrictions represented a massive quality of life bonus for everybody who was in those states. Whereas if you were in California at the time, like me, you got screwed. You had to deal with all the COOF nonsense. Let's see. But no, Martin. I'm not exactly the guy who has that kind of a temperament. I'm much more. I'm not extroverted enough, surprisingly, to go do that. So yeah, just no, no political campaigns or electoral campaigns for me. Aaron Wolf 99 says it's their only dreadnought as the war happened. 2 were lost, 1 to mine, 1 to Italian torpedo Moro. Yes, Aaron Wolf. Many such cases. Navies which were overinvested in dreadnoughts during the time period rapidly found out that submarines are actually effective against battleships. Mines are actually effective against battleships. Like even with the armor belt that battleships, dreadnought style battleships have, like a mine, which frankly, this is when you start talking about modern mine technology. But even prior to that, like even contact mines from the era, they're going to hit and explode beneath the armor belt essentially of the ship, right? The armor belt, it's going to explode at like kind of underneath the ship, and so like that's not where the armor is at in any case. So like you're going to cause a breach, and there's going to be flooding even if you have a double hull underneath. I didn't check out to see that if that battleship had a double hull. I'm assuming it's early enough that it possibly did not. Maybe it did, but anyway. Let's see here. But yeah, like the problem with battleships in World War II is they, ironically, this is an example of a weapon system that outlasted its usefulness by several decades. And all navies basically had them because they're gigantic. They have massive guns, of course, but the problem is that they're just extremely vulnerable, right? The guns are powerful, but they're not like they're not as good as was expected. And of course, guns are just very short range when compared to planes. And when you have a plane that's carrying, 1,000-pound bomb, 500-pound bomb, and dropping it right on top of you. Also, the other thing that from ship construction is that the deck plates are thinner than the actual armor itself on the ship. So dropping it right from the top is actually very effective. This is supposedly for the HMS Hood. How the HMS Hood and her fellow ship was sunk by the shoot, what is it? By the Bismarck and by the Prince Eugen. The basically both of those ships sank this pair of battle cruisers by using arcing shell fire in order to breach the deck plates on those ships. And of course, that was actually very effective. Like, obviously, uh, HMS Hood got sunk by the German Bismarck. So, it works. And it's the same principle, basically. And it's also the same principle that you see with all sorts of other weaponry when it comes to armored like platforms, like say the T-72, any sort of tank. This is why Javelin is so effective, because it basically uses a shaped charge and drops a shaped charge directly on top of a tank. So it's hitting the turret, it's hitting the top armor, and it uses the metal that is being formed by the shaped charge to puncture the armor of a tank from the top. So it's basically the same principle. You're just doing the same thing using different weapons. Vilios, sorry, I'm terrible at Slavic pronunciation. Jachenas? Am I pronouncing? I don't know what that little carrot thing on top of the C on Slavic names is. Sorry. He says, "Do you think Russians will swing north from Avdiivka or the east?" Okay. So I think the movement towards Chasiv Yar and the general Russian pressure towards the Oskil River and the Siversk line, I think that's largely just pressure being placed to keep the Ukrainians busy. I think that now that Baltic, okay, you're Baltic. What country are you from, if you don't mind me asking? Are you Estonian, Latvian, Lithuanian? One of those other countries that really hates Russia? Maybe you do mind me asking. Anyway, so like I was saying, I think the movement from the Russians towards the north is actually somewhat misleading, because that's just pressure, right? And that's not really offensive action. They'll take the territory if they take it, right? But what they're trying to do now that they have numerical superiority is to constantly pressure the Ukrainians on all sections of the front line, basically at once. Once they've done that, they will then use numerical superiority in one section of the front line to get a breach, basically. There's a name for this strategy. I forget what it's called. What is that? Hold on, I got to do some googling. I used to have this memorized, but now I don't. Shoot. Fuck. My memory's going, man. I'm getting old. Let's see. I know Frederick the Great was famous for doing this. What was this? No, it wasn't Rossbach. It was it was Leuthen. That was what it was. Yeah, Battle of Leuthen. Yes. Where is it? Yes, oblique. Yeah, it's an oblique maneuver. Yeah, oblique. You're attacking oblique. The oblique order is what it's called. Yeah, so basically what the Russians are doing is what's called an oblique order. Let me see if I can pull this up for you guys. Okay. Where is it? If I can remember how to share screen. Where is it? Where is it? I don't stream often enough. Let's see. Present. There we go. Share screen. Yes. We will share the oblique order. There we go. You should be able to see a graphic now. Can you all see that? Looks like you can. Excellent. So yes, this is what the Russians are essentially trying to do with Avdiivka. This is not exactly what they're trying to do, but or I shouldn't say that. This pictogram that you see here isn't exactly correct. What the Russians are trying to do, if you see this big, gigantic blue box on the left of this graphic here, what the Russians essentially have in terms of deployment is they've gotten all of their forces basically equal with the Ukrainians in the south. In the north, essentially, maybe they have a little bit numerical superiority in the north. But in any case, it looks like the numbers that they're bringing in are in the center of their line, right? So they're using an oblique order, but they're just pinning all of the other Ukrainian forces in place, causing attrition, forcing the Ukrainians to not be able to tactically redeploy and maneuver forces to wherever they find a breach in their line. So the Russians now have penetrated the Ukrainian center of their line near Avdiivka and Ocheritina and all these other little towns that are on the road to Pokrovsk. And now that they have a penetration, now they're going to send the rest of their forces in and create exploitation and a breakthrough. So now, like, obviously this is a flank maneuver, but they're basically just doing the same or a similar strategy by attempting to penetrate the enemy center at where they see it as its weakest point. All right, we can go ahead and stop sharing that now. Thank you. Excellent. Let's see. So yes. So yeah, I think the Russians are going to go swing north from Avdiivka. I think that's basically the plan. Although it looks like they might attack one of the end points of the Ukrainian Slavyansk line of cities. They look like Konstantinivka is pretty much on the road from Chasiv Yar. That's on the road westward from Chasiv Yar. So I think they might attack and envelop Konstantinivka in an attempt to compromise that defensive line. I thought they were going to go towards Pokrovsk, honestly. They might still do it, but they might decide to compromise that defensive line before they do it. It might just be a question of order. Like, I thought they would have gone for Pokrovsk first and then driven eastwards to attack Konstantinivka and Chasiv Yar, because I thought the terrain at Chasiv Yar was pretty imposing. Maybe the Russians think they got the resources to take it, but it looks like they're going to go east or swing north from Avdiivka. Let's see here. Why is it? There we go. PHN Negative says, frat boys, maybe Jewish, versus cringe anti-Israel freaks, anti-white. This is a raging debate, isn't it? Well, I think that the frat boys I'm not exactly a fan of, because I'm a nerd by nature. So I don't like frat boys. I don't like frat culture. Many such cases. You can unfollow if you want. I don't care. But like the problem with the anti-Israel freaks is that they make the mistake of assuming that like Jewish and Israel equals white because it's a colonizer nation. Like, this is something that hasn't really like seeped into Jewish consciousness yet. But I think that it's becoming very, very clear that the spell under the Boomer Truth regime is starting to break, because the left has no patience for this, and the right decreasingly has patience for this style. And I think it's largely a generational issue more than anything else. It's a matter of time, unfortunately. The real question for us is, which of these groups do we tactically signal that we are willing to have dialogue with? I have no problem discussing things with normicons. In fact, like, getting people who might be sympathetic to you and having discussions is actually quite quite invigorating, because you like, I had this experience when I was talking to some chick who is doing a PhD program at my school, and she's basically saying, like, well, the like, basically she's a normie, and you have answers and responses that these people have never heard of before, like, ever. And so for them it's a very unique dialogue and discussion to have, and it's one that, like, having this multiple times is like, you feel like you have all of the answers, basically. It's very invigorating in that way. But as to these questions, like, I mean, I would rather the frat boys versus the anti-Israel freaks, I guess, because I know I would rather be pro-white than anti-white in today's world, because no one else is standing up for us. Let's see. Aaron Wolf 99 says its torpedo protection was subpar and failed as far as I know. That was pretty good for what they have. Okay. Okay, yeah, I mean, that might just be another example of typical battleship of the time period. You know, torpedo protection is not. It was early days, right? And battleships were always vulnerable to being torpedoed by submarines. They were always vulnerable to being torpedoed from, especially, aircraft. Like, yeah, I mean, it's just, you can add more protection if you want, but it's not going to stop it. Martin Callender says, do you think targeting computers will get so good missiles become obsolete? Well, it's funny you should mention this, because actually targeting computers are already so good that missiles are easily targetable. It is proof of concept, right? The radars are already so good, and the anti air missiles are already so good that it is possible to have an incoming. You can shoot down missiles with other missiles, basically, is what I'm trying to say. The technology already exists and has existed for 30 years, almost 40 years now, actually. If you want a book recommendation on missile technology and how that works on the tactical level, it is a bit dated because it's from the Falklands War, but there's an excellent book called 100 Days of War, and it's by Admiral Sandy Woodward, which is his experience as the strike group commander commanding the Navy carrier group that took back the Falklands. And it's fascinating because you can see in that one, they're using technology that was designed in the late 50s and early 60s, and basically they're using it in the 1980s because they're going to war with the fleet they have. They're not fully prepared, but this is the equipment that they have. And notably, a lot of the missile systems that they did have, especially the I think the Sea Wolf, if I'm not mistaken, or yeah, either the Sea Wolf or the Sea Slug, whichever one they were using. One of those is long range air missile defense. The other is a short range point defense, kind of similar in fashion to how we use the SM-2 and the ESSM or Sea Sparrow missiles. So basically, the missiles are extremely good, and they've been good for a very, very long time. But the problem with missiles is not whether or not the targeting computers are good enough. It's whether how expensive the missiles are. To shoot down a missile with another missile is the equivalent of shooting down a bullet with another bullet, right? Or an artillery shell with another artillery shell, if you want to be even more autistic about this because of naval combat. So the way that this really, the problem is that you have a lot of missiles out there that are relatively easy and cheap to produce. like if you want to look it up on Wikipedia is a great resource because it doesn't give you the real figures for range data or anything like that. Those numbers are all fake and not real. The real numbers are classified, of course, for all of this information. But like the cost of like YJ-83 or Charlie 803, which is like the Chinese equivalent of Harpoon, basically. That's I think like $500,000. An SM2 costs like an SM2 like basic bitch like block 1 2 3 costs like 1.5 million dollars a piece. So you're shooting like over time, like eventually attrition starts to matter, right? And eventually you run out of missiles. And um like the cruisers basically are so, and destroyers that we have are so good at shooting down missiles because that's what they were designed to do. They're designed to defend the carrier. Like that's what Aegis systems are designed to do. But do I think that missiles will become obsolete? No, missiles are not becoming obsolete. Missiles are actually still very viable. What you're seeing now is the movement away from gigantism. And so it used to be you needed big weapons because you had big weapons platforms. The carrier is a huge example of this. American supercarriers are massive, massive high value targets. And like the Soviets, even in the 70s and 60s and 80s, were designing like missiles to take down American carriers. Like if you want to look at the old Soviet missiles, they're still in service, a lot of them, and the reason why they're still in service is because they're just damn good missiles. They're damn good offensive missiles for what they do. In fact, like Harpoon, we're slowly moving away from Harpoon because we want to use NASAMS. But really, the United States is now just getting into the game of long range missile play, whereas other navies have more longer range missiles and have done for years, basically. But drones just and this movement towards smaller ships, smaller frigates, and building lots of them means that the missiles also become smaller with a smaller warhead as well. And that's basically a drone. Essentially, a drone is just the equivalent of a missile that uses an electro-optical guidance system, basically. Could the Reichsmarine just went only U-boats to save resources, or was just not a viable doctrine for them? Aaron Wolf. This is an interesting question as well, because I think that the Reichsmarine, no, the U-boat strategy is good. Okay, the problem that the U-boat strategy runs into is, first of all, Roosevelt decides to give the British 50 World War I era U-boats, or not U-boats, excuse me, World War I era destroyers, right? And you can upgrade those to the modern specifications, whatever, for whatever was modern at the time. You can do the maintenance and all of that stuff, but they're still usable. And this is like directly providing weaponry in exchange for something else, which is British access to British bases or old British bases. So the wolf pack strategy could have been viable. It could have been. The problem is the United States got involved. That's the short answer. Like Roosevelt did way more in terms of guarding British convoys to Britain than just give the British destroyers. In fact, he not only did he give them destroyers, the United States basically guaranteed by us patrolling the North Atlantic, we basically escorted our own convoys to to Iceland, basically, and then the British basically took over. So you're managerially finding a solution for the reality of German wolf packs, essentially. And Germany was not at war with the United States, but obviously that was interpreted by Herr Hitler as partially, continuously as acts of war, which is why after Pearl Harbor he declared war. That's my opinion anyway. But if you're talking about resources, Well, the problem with the Reichsmarine in resources is the Reichsmarine pre-war was just simply not ready for war. They didn't have enough ships constructed, not in the surface side, not in the U-boat side. And even Hitler basically told Admiral Raeder, who was the commander of the Reichsmarine pre-war and up till 1942, I think. He basically told him, um, like, we actually aren't going to be going to war until like 43, 44, right? No earlier than that. So we don't have to be. We can uh, divert resources to the army instead of the navy because the army takes priority right now. And so the other issue is obviously is aircraft too. Um, like the I've always wondered why the Germans never actually had aircraft carriers in World War II, and I would imagine part of the answer is because those are very big, large capital ships, and the Germans are building battleships and armed big cruisers. So and they're not building carriers, of course. But the problem with carriers is you need aircraft. Well, that costs aluminum. Where are you going to get the aluminum, right? Goering needs the aluminum because the Luftwaffe needs planes. So, like, you can't tell the Kriegsmarine that they need to build carriers because you need, to build airplanes also, which it becomes a resource problem. And Germany just didn't have the critical resources in sea combat by the time they went to war with Britain. And so, like, this is back to my point earlier about strategy: is how do you get a sea power to commit to battle when they don't want to commit to battle? And the answer is you already have the aircraft. You already have, using Italy and your control of Greece and of Crete, you've contesting the Mediterranean. So you need to double down on contesting the Mediterranean and force the British fleet to fight where it is in a disadvantageous position, right? Martin Callender says overextending an enemy. Yes, absolutely. Sports bros and tech bros are both cool. Sometimes they could be the same bro. XD, says Corbin. Yes, and that's probably true as people age, I would imagine. The stereotype of the dumb jock seems to apply only to, like, redneck types of the worst variety. Which that's a stereotype that exists for a reason. But yeah, like, people who are like physically fit and smart are like, those are your special forces guys. You know, Fabs are the new artillery, it seems. Well, yes and no. Like, as we've seen from this conflict, artillery is the new artillery. It seems. Like, Fabs are useful because, like, and here's where you start thinking about where exactly should you be putting your resources. Missiles are useful, but they're also extremely expensive. Long range missiles, especially. So why would you spend the money on missiles when you can use a drone with a strapped on 80 millimeter mortar that is fairly accurate, to, like, a matter of feet, basically. So yeah, Fabs indeed are a new form of artillery, but they get used in a similar fashion, I would imagine, to, like, how air power was used in previous eras, where you're trying to attack your enemy's rear lines of communication and supply behind the forward line of contact. Basically, you're trying to inflict attrition before the enemy is even able to get into the fight. Martin Callender says, when they get good enough, surely you can stop missiles with just machine guns, no? Well, not if it's going Mach 2 or 3. That's kind of a difficult proposition. And to be honest, this is basically what CIWS is. CIWS is essentially trying to stop a missile with a Gatling gun, with a chain gun. And it does work. CIWS is very effective as a point defense weapon. which is why the U.S. Navy loves to use them. And it's why the Russians had, point defense systems as well on their ships in roughly the same caliber, 20 to millimeter to 30 millimeter. But missiles, actually, speaking of stopping air assets with machine guns, the book 100 Days of War actually tells us that the British tried to supplement the fact that their air defense systems weren't working as effectively as they would like with machine guns. And there's a funny story because they actually got a confirmed kill on an Argentinian aircraft. I believe it might have been an F4, if I'm not, I might be mistaken about that. But basically, they got a confirmed kill with a 50 caliber machine gun. Like, how cool is that? I mean, that's just insane. Corbin says, "Do I know StarCraft? Do I know StarCraft? My life for ire." No, but which StarCraft? I've played the original StarCraft and Brood War extensively. I played it in college because I had a buddy who used to come with me and play LAN parties with Koreans, which I have a funny story about that. But basically, the Koreans are so freaking good; they're beating 2 human players and multiple computers at the same time, and still not getting crushed, which is hilarious. But yes, and of course, I liked Wings of Liberty. Some people criticized Wings of Liberty because it was too, shall we say, juvenile with its storyline. I have a really good IRL friend of mine who always says that he hates the Wings of Liberty campaign because he basically in the sandbox mode for StarCraft 1, he and his buddy basically came up with the same storyline. Which I replied to him. I tell him now, it's a good storyline. You got to know who your market is, bro. Like, your market is like 14-year-old white dudes who just want to like save the princess, right? Or in this case, the nasty skank Hoopotamus who gave herself to the Zerg willingly. Well, I guess less willingly, I guess, but in the case of Kerrigan. But. Could Ajapal Singh say, could Germany have won if it went total war mode in December 1941? No. I think that Germany needed to... it didn't need to go total war mode in 1941. It needed to keep Britain out of the fight and knock Britain out of the fight in 1941. That's what it needed. And it needed to prevent the entry of the United States into the war. That's what it needed. Corbin asks, what if Biden wins? Well, you're fucked. We are so fucked if Biden wins. I don't have any hope for the future after Trump. I think in many ways he is kind of a last gasp and is perceived by the powers that be as such. And I think that will be a major reason why he's probably reelected. I think there will not be fortification this time because there won't be any need for fortification. But what if Biden wins? What if Biden wins? I don't know. I mean, it's going to get worse. Things are going to get worse. You're going to have a capital gains tax of 40%, which is something I'm extremely angry about because how am I supposed to retire with a capital gains tax on my 401k at 40%? How am I supposed to have capital gains tax when I'm inheriting property? And if I'm selling that for a profit, when basically 40% of that gets taken from me, how am I supposed to deal with a capital gains tax if I try to sell back, precious metals or assets, which is like the one class of asset that you can purchase and own that isn't directly inflatable? Like, how am I supposed to eventually sell my Bitcoin so that my children and my children's children have something to live off of? Or if I don't have children because of reasons like, my my cousin's children, how are they supposed to get their full inheritance that they're due from my labors and my efforts and my slogging through life if there's a 40% tax on it, and then there's an inheritance tax on top of all of that? So it's like, I mean, we're just, I'm tired of being replaced in my own country and having to pay for it. I mean, like, that's just the end of it, right? And I think Biden winning is, it needs, you would need fortification basically, and I think you've with the whole Israel thing, you've basically cut off Biden from his left. Basically, he's now kind of ostracized from his left. They're not happy with him. They might stay home. Trump wasn't as bad as they all said. He's not a dictator, obviously, because he didn't cross the Rubicon in January 6th. So the narrative that you can run is, oh well, Trump actually isn't all that bad. You know, you want Big Daddy Trump. You want to go back to Trump. We want to go back to the 1980s when America was great. You want to go back to synthwave. Uh, you want to go back to good fucking movies on the television screen. I demand better Goyslop. I demand better Goyslop. But yeah, honestly, I think it's over for the country. I think that is the solidification of the regime again, and the locking in of normal everyday regime politics. Basically, I think that's essentially it. Vilius Justinus says, what reason do you think U.S. Air Force haven't implemented fighter drones? Cost, I would imagine. Why? Why would you need fighter drones? I mean, you have Predator, right? You have things like that, which are like, the entire point of Predator drones was, okay, I need some sort of long range, easily transportable, comparatively low cost observation and surveillance platform that isn't like a piloted aircraft. And also, the natural development for these platforms is to, be able to have it shoot missiles. Like, I think Hellfire is one that Predator can use. Obviously, that would make sense, but like, why would you implement a fighter drone? Why? Like, what is the point of a fighter drone? Like, I mean, like, the problem that I don't like, I just have a very, and this is where I'm going to like put on my Luddite hat for a second. There's a spiritual problem with drones that I find. I don't like war when it's being conducted with drones. Like, I've seen the footage from the front lines of Ukraine, and I don't like seeing dudes, cowering in a trench, hoping that the drone doesn't drop an 80 millimeter mortar right on top of them, and inevitably the drone does. I think there's a very spiritual. I think that's very bad because it takes away all of the human skill of warfare. I think, and of course you have to pilot the drone, of course, so there is some skill in that, I guess. But yeah, I don't like drones. Ajapal Singh says, under Plan Z, Germany had 4 aircraft carriers planned. Corbin replies with Z smiley face. Yes, of course. I mean, I'm not. Plan Z is not something I'm particularly aware of. I haven't researched it, so I don't have an answer to that. But the like I said, the problem is that Germany declared war and went to war too soon. And it went to war against. There was no need for Germany to go to war against Britain and the Soviet Union and the United States. I think that Hitler was correct that he would have eventually declared war on the Soviet Union. I think he could have, despite diplomatic difficulties, he could have pushed that out for another year or two and bought himself enough time to force Britain to come to the peace table. I am coming up on another 2 hours here. We're at an hour and 49 minutes. So if there are no further questions, I think I might cut it off at 2 hours. I will hang out for another 10 minutes. So get your questions in now while you can, please. Let's see. In terms of other things, like I'll just get my shilling out of the way, actually. In terms of content production, like I just came out with another article for the OGC on the Battle of Midway this last week. Yeah, do follow the OGC guys. They're good guys. They're one of the few like non-spurgy like dudes who can actually seem to give a shit and actually know the direness of the situation that we're in and want to organize with it and really are just very unwilling on any level to let petty bullshit get in the way of achieving good things for our people. Yes. Also, my own Substack. I have like the problem is I'm in school right now, so like I'm in a bit of a break for about a month before the next term starts up. I have a lot of ideas for content. Like I have so many articles on Substack that I have titles for. I have ideas, but I just can't seem to get the time to ever write them down. Maybe someday. One of these days I'll get through it. Let's see. Ajapal Singh says it was to be completed by 1948. Well, there you go. There you go. I mean, your war plan to defeat the British Empire on the high seas is not good enough. It's just too early. But of course, the problem with Herr Hitler is that he thought of these things in terms of his lifespan, not in terms of Germany's lifespan. He thinks he needs to get all this stuff done now, or it's never going to happen, which frankly I don't agree with. Could the British have been brought to the peace table if the BEF was taken prisoner at Dunkirk, or was Churchill, FDR not going to let that happen? Interesting question there, Aaron Wolf. Possibly. Like the Dunkirk was a cope victory, if you will, a moral victory, as they say. And the problem is, as we've seen in Ukraine, when somebody is belligerent and they don't want to make peace at any cost, and what I've been trying to communicate to the audience throughout this entire stream here is, with the exhaustion thing, is you have to exhaust their cope, right? They have to run out of cope. No more cope answers. You lost on the battlefield. You're losing this war. You need to make peace, and we're willing to, and if you offer them a generous peace, that makes the bargain even better, and it makes it less humiliating. Although I don't think Churchill was going to let that happen. I mean, you have to remember, Churchill didn't take power until after France had fallen, right? So, I mean, now it's one thing to deal with Neville Chamberlain. It's quite another thing for Churchill to come in and give his little speech about, oh, we'll fight them, right? Basically, and what we've seen before in terms of warfare, right, and what we've seen in Ukraine as well, is you can try, if you're losing a war, to change leadership. Okay, maybe it was the leadership's problem. This was a leadership problem. You can retool, right? You can reconstitute your forces with better equipment. Find out all of the hard lessons and do that. But this is the problem, is that now, after changing leadership, you kind of, at least in my view, you reset the clock in a way. So by resetting, like Chamberlain got like 3 strikes on his own, right? He was humiliated in Czechoslovakia, right? Because the Germans broke their word on the Czechs. He was humiliated in Poland. He was humiliated in Denmark and in Norway. And he was humiliated finally in France. And that's what basically caused people to lose faith in the government. Now, if Churchill says, aha, we are going to fight. We're going to fight and fight until the finish, to the last man, woman, and child, right? which is basically the spirit of what he's saying. Churchill has declared total war in 1940, and that's basically what he's saying. And so, what is he now? What is he now doing? Well, he's basically you're trying to come to peace, but he doesn't want to come to peace because he knows that I'm going to goad you into making strategic level errors. And so Germany just basically needed to have enough fighter aircraft to defend their cities from British bombing raids, and fight in North Africa and force Churchill to come to the peace table. Because after you lose, and you lose really hard, a nation has to come to the peace table, right? That's the way that it works. You exhaust every cope answer, and you have to inflict one final defeat, basically. And that's the strategy of how that works, which is very odd because Hitler, for somebody who seems to intuitively understand, lets his armed forces intuitively use Prussian-style maneuver warfare, that seems to be it's very odd that he doesn't understand that. StarCraft 1 and 2 are keynote. Yes, they are. PH Negative says, imagine if your fighter drone gets hacked. I expect jamming technology to get better, and a bigger drone is just too vulnerable against radar. Yes, that's also very true. What we've also seen is these commercial drones have huge problems with cyber warfare. One of the biggest rumors or unconfirmed pieces of information, I should say, about Ukraine is that the drones are extremely vulnerable, not to like conventional weapons as such, but to EW. You just put out a broad spectrum jamming frequency, and they're not going to work the way that you want them. So yes, that is a huge problem for the kinds of drones that are being used in Ukraine. It's like anti-aircraft. Yes, of course, the Germans Gepard, that particular anti-aircraft gun is very good. A lot of these you're going to see a return of point defense again. Anti-aircraft guns in 20 to 30 millimeter, maybe even flak. That's going to make a return, I feel, because you can't ignore point defenses. PH Negative actually says again, Mandrill, have you thought about making a weekly war analysis show? I'm tired of watching commie channels. No, PH Negative, I am not that kind of person to make a weekly war analysis channel. This channel, I have much more of an artistic attitude towards this channel than, and indeed to my Substack, than to be a content creator in that style. Like, I don't like the Tim Pool, early Tim Pool anyway, putting out 3 videos a day just to keep the algorithm churning and to get me more followers and subscribers. I don't like that. This is an artistic project for me. It's a passion project a little bit. And so I stream and I make videos when I want. And that's pretty much what I have to say about it. Do you have any idea why Byzantine Lamellar was banded? No, Martin, I don't have any idea why Byzantine Lamellar was banded. I'm not particularly an expert on Lamellar armor. I know it's kind of like a composite armor, isn't it? It's like in between a scale mail and or like a ring mail with like leather sections of it, if I'm not mistaken. It's much more common with lightly armored, or quote unquote lightly armored troops. It's definitely like plate armor is definitely like a medieval European thing, but other nations and other peoples, if they don't have, for whatever reason, they just don't have the steel, they don't have the smelting capabilities, they don't seem to make plate armor, maybe because it's too expensive. Ajay Paul Singh says, favorite U.S. president? That's very easy. My favorite president is actually Calvin Coolidge. Amity Schley's book on Coolidge was a very, very excellent read. I do recommend it for those who are interested. I know everybody in these spheres gives right-wing book recommendations, but the book Coolidge is excellent. Although it is kind of a boring read because it's the discussion about somebody who is a high to high career path, like this guy gets early onto the high performance career path basically, and never really leaves it. So it's like reading about somebody who has a string of unbroken victories, which isn't exactly entertaining, I guess. It's also a peacetime president. He's a lawyer by nature and by trade, which I don't mind. We need lawyers, we need lawgivers for our people, but um, like I think famously, there's an anecdote about him where he gave a uh, a law book to some Ethiopian king in the 1920s, which is interesting. It's a very fascinating gift to give, giving the gift of laws. But yes, Coolidge is my favorite president for a variety of reasons, and of course he's an immigration restrictionist. He is in favor of protection, but he's also free market. To me, um, Coolidge, even though he is a New England Yankee, a stereotypical New England Yankee, and he has a bit of shit libby tendencies, right? He's very kind of anti-war, and he's kind of pro like League of Nations. He's pro treaties. Like he thinks that these things can be decided through peace and treaty, basically, because he's a lawyer and a nerd. But yes, he's my favorite president. Vilius Jessinas says, it seems that the US doesn't have Blairite type technocrat faction, only neocons and third worldists. Well, I disagree. I think it's muted in a way. I think the technocrat faction is representative of Silicon Valley, but of course, Silicon Valley seems to have, because of its geography, a lot of overlap with the woke types, the more explicitly like immigrant third worldist, pro-immigration, like LGBT and leftist, right? So yeah, the Blairites seem to have just not taken in the U.S., and I wonder if that's just because of the nature of British politics versus American politics. Ajapal Singh says Churchill became prime minister on the day the Battle of France began on 10 May. Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. Singh. I appreciate that. Appreciate the correction. Well, anyway, but so that sounds like a situation then as a leader, you can claim that, oh, well, I was handed, a giant turd that I had to fix, basically. And which is why, because of that situation of, oh, well, this was all the doings of my predecessor, that's good enough for a lot of people. And if you simply say that, well, you can be excused temporarily. So that's why it's necessary, for Dunkirk and for the Battle of Britain to not play out the way that they did. I mean, Dunkirk, that's also a debate, right? I think Dunkirk was people talk about whether Hitler should have halted the panzers or kept pressing on. I think he made the correct tactical and operational decision at that point. I think that was grounded in sound doctrine and theory. I think that waiting for you have to remember, he didn't have the ability to get the infantry. They didn't have the logistics or the transport, the mechanization yet to be able to move the infantry quick enough. I guess you could say that, well, even though that was the correct decision, well, maybe there might have been some legitimate risk taking involved there. I think that would have been disastrous. I think that he made the correct decision, and it literally, you have to remember, Dunkirk, they were using civilian vessels and civilian transport to bring the personnel home. Basically, they were defeated. They were literally defeated, and basically, it's like a magic trick, right? You pull the magic trick out of the hat, out of your sleeve, and unfortunately, like you only have so many magic tricks that you can pull out of the hat, right? Eventually, you start running out of things that you can use to prevent total defeat and collapse. And essentially, that was basically what the British did: is they sacrificed their heavy equipment in order to save their personnel. And so they have an actual like army. All right. I think that is basically it. There doesn't seem to be any more questions. Corbin says, good stream. Thank you, Corbin. You are my strongest supporter indeed. You were always here. Let's see. I don't have anything else to say other than to show my own Substack. I do have interesting ideas. I want to write on my Substack the article on how the Third Reich won the Second World War. So go check that out when that comes out. I think that will be a very, very long article. So when it does come out, I probably will put it behind the paywall. Of course, eventually, inevitably, I will upload it here as a freebie. Like I seem to, in terms of how I want to run this channel, like I like to put my articles uploaded in voice format because people like to hear your voice and your thoughts. And of course, there's images attached to the video. So like I like to do that because people who are like freebies typically like listen, and because they like to listen during work or do that sort of thing because they work whatever job that they work with their hands, or they have some position where they can listen to podcasts or videos during work or when they're driving or doing chores or whatever. So like I like to do that for that purpose. And then my monetization path, because I haven't figured out how Entropy works yet, that I basically am relying on buy me a coffee essentially, which kind of sucks, but yeah, it's still good. So yeah, if you want to support me financially, you can either subscribe to my Substack through the paid subscription, or you can buy me a coffee, and if you sign up, I'll make you a paid supporter, I guess. I have no problem if people like, pay me. Anyway, thanks everyone for showing up. It's about 2 hours now, 2 hours and almost 10 minutes. So I think I'm going to leave it here. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend.